Karen, I wanted to ask you a question to begin with about music. I feel like as a filmmaker, the music you choose is potent, and there's like an amazing opening scene in your feature with a track by Howlin' Wolf, and I know you've made music videos in the past for the vaccines, is that right, and Franz Ferdinand. Do you have a filmic relationship with music, do you think?
I think I probably love music more than I love film. It's the thing that feeds me the most. And I'm constantly listening to music or obsessing over music. And I think the way I approach film is, in terms of how I construct the things, is from a place of rhythm, because I think the two mediums are more related than we think. So I kind of see Sister Midnight, maybe, which was, yeah, it's got its own rhythm and structure. And I don't know, maybe it's like a kind of Ramon song or something, where it sort of repeats, and then explodes, and then makes a turn, and then is frantic again. Or yeah. So.
And at what point does the music come into a script? Like, how is that relationship between writing a scene and feeling like you have the perfect soundtrack for it?
Music comes very early. Sometimes the song will inform a scene, even if the song doesn't even end up in the film. But pretty much all the music in that film was worked out as I was writing it, because I sort of think visually and I think with sound, because film is an audiovisual medium, so dialogue isn't for me the main thrust of sort of narrative delivery, let's say. So music comes very early, like a lot, like that Motorhead song that sings Sister Midnight was like in my head for 10 years, like at that exact spot. And I sort of constructed the scene to it. And similarly, the thing I'm doing now, there's a lot of music, and I've started to actually write the tracks into the script rather than just having a sheet on the side that I deliver with the script. So.
Have you been ever so wedded to the idea of a song in a film and then never been able to get it in?
Funnily enough, because I have the most badass music supervisor in the world, shout out to Clee Savage, we got everything.
What a great name.
Yeah, we got everything we wanted. T-Rex, Motorhead, Buddy Holly, The Stooges, everything. There was one thing we didn't get, and I was wedded to it for about a week, and then we had to just live without it. So there's if anyone's seen the film, it might be a spoiler, but there's a kind of fake Japanese samurai film that shows up at some point in the film. We shot that from scratch. And initially I'd wrote it with the music from Kurosawa's Yojimbo in mind. And it was early in prep, we checked and the rights were fine. Something happened where the rights ended up reverting back to this huge Japanese conglomerate, and they were asking for some ridiculous amount. So through some friends in New York, someone somewhere else in the world, we were trying to get a hold of Kurosawa's son, and all this stuff was going on, and then it was just too crazy. We had to let go at the last minute, and I sat in the hallway of the post house we were grading, and I hummed a melody to one of our collaborators, and he put the song together.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I was thinking during that scene it would be great to have a run of films, a sort of film marathon of films that have films within them.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
And there was really like, as soon as that bit on the screen came on, I was like, oh, that would be a good little series. I've also...
Oh yeah, what will you stick on it?
That's a really good question. I'm trying to think of
films within films.
I guess, like, is it Requiem for a Dream? They're constantly watching that movie. There'd be a darker element to it. I would, I guess, in terms of like TV, you could go down the sort of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory route.
Yeah, or Twin Peaks. They're always cutting, aren't they, to that?
What
early
is it?
on,
Yeah.
they're cutting to this sort of soap opera.
Yeah, what is it?
It sort of disappears after a while, but what is it called?
I'm not going to be able to remember that.
And because in the first season, it kind of cuts to it quite a lot, which is
Yeah.
quite late. And I keep going, I want to see what the rest of this thing looks like.
That's my mental exercise the rest of the day, is to think about films that have other films
Yeah, I think you
within
curate
them.
the whole season.
Yeah.
Oh.
And I've also seen your film described as having a kind of, and its protagonist as having a punk rock sensibility. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do.
I thought it was a nice way to describe a film.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, punk rock is my big love still, and I mean, I didn't set out to like say I'm going to make a punk film. So it was interesting. And punk rock is an attitude; it's not a jacket or a chord structure. So it was kind of nice that the attitude came across enough for people to pick up on that. I thought that was really cool.
Okay, so going into your topic, which I believe is all things ancient Greece, I usually ask my guests if they can to give me a sort of 1 minute summary of their relationship with that subject and why it matters to them. So if you can put that into a minute, how would you?
I will try my best. So yeah, at some point I got sort of obsessed with ancient Greece, and I mean that's such a broad thing to say, but it's such a cauldron of stuff that continues to sort of feed me, inform me, and blow my mind. And by that, I'm talking about whether it's the myths, the tragedies, and then the magic of ancient Greece, because back then there wasn't such a fine line between science, religion, and magic. So I guess we could call it the occult.
And I wonder whether within that you also might include the arts. Do you think that the arts were in that period of time related to something which they might consider to be magic as well?
Uh, yeah, that's an interesting one, and I have tried to look at it because I consider magic and art the same thing, you know. Um, and I guess a lot of art was devotional, right?
Or an offering,
Or an offering,
yeah.
exactly. Like, in the temples of Asclepius, who was this the healer god. And I'm extremely fascinated by this and the cults of the time. There would be these temples where you would go if you had an ailment, and you would be given a specific diet. You would watch tragedy to invoke catharsis, the purge, the emotional purge. Um, and then you would be fumigated with frankincense, which recalled Nesemene, the mother of the muses, who was memory, so you could remember your dreams. And then you would sleep in these cells, and Asclepios, the healer, would visit you in the dream and either give you a prescription or tell you what was wrong with you. And that's how they would heal. Why was I going to that? Yes, so they would give like votive offerings, like if somebody had a broken limb, they would offer the limb, or like, and in the main museum in Athens, there's a wall full of these votive offerings. You've got like a penis, you've got an eye, you've got a foot. It's like, and then also the pottery, I guess, retold stories of the myths. So yeah, I think the art, and I just think we're looking at stuff, and I have to say this: I'm not a scholar. I didn't learn any of this stuff in school or at university. I'm a kind of rogue amateur nerd on this subject, but I guess there's not so many boundaries between all these different faculties and things as there is now. So I think they were all sort of swirling in some soup together.
And the idea that in that period of time, the gods were obviously in control of fate and of destiny and of various aspects of personality, but this idea that these gods were people that you could converse with and that sometimes came down to earth, and that when you were speaking to someone you didn't know whether they were a god or whether they were a human. I suppose that idea does have a kind of magic and spirituality to it, this idea that you can imbue a person with so much potential for an idea and something which they represent, both in terms of like a personal narrative and a kind of worldly narrative. Is that something that sort of interests you also in relation to filmmaking, or even just your day-to-day life? Do you think that you have a sort of internal conversation or a compass? Or
Yeah, I find the gods fascinating. I think the way you described it is great, and they are ideas, right?
yeah.
They're like they represent ideas, and it is also interesting that they weren't. I guess let's look at like other traditions. I mean, Olympus was like a real mountain, so I guess they expected they were all sitting up there and stuff. But they're interesting, the Greek gods, because they're really morally strange and confusing, which I find really fascinating. Like, let's not talk about Zeus very much because I think he was a questionable character with his gender politics. But then you have someone like Dionysus, who I guess becomes later on in the Roman version called Bacchus, who is then this sort of bloated, sort of buffoon-like wine god. But if you go back, and the Romans had an interesting relationship to Dionysus because it was the only cult that was run by women, and so they outlawed it. But if you go back, Dionysus was born twice, and he was also both genders, which is really quite interesting. And I think about the Greek gods a lot. Look, I don't sit here thinking that they're real, but I'm a big believer that there's something very powerful in the human imagination, and even like the definition of the imagination has changed. It was more faculty of the mind prior to the Enlightenment than to what it is now, which is make believe.
Yeah.
So, and you can look at them as facets of yourself or facets of the natural world. Zeus being the storm clouds, Athena being the faculty of wisdom within you. Dionysus can be lots of different things, and we're probably in his or her own podcast.
So what was
I don't know if I quite answered your question.
No, you absolutely did. I was wondering maybe if there was a text that started you off on that journey.
Yes, it was Homer's Odyssey. So without going into too much detail, I found myself in a position in a certain part of my life where I myself was exiled from the place I called home, and it took me a long time to get back. And then it was quite a big traumatic experience. And at some point, I was traveling, and this copy of the Odyssey just sort of lurched out from a bookshelf at me, and I picked it up and I started to read it. And I'd never studied ancient Greece as a kid in school or any of this stuff, and it just sort of blew my mind. And I kind of realized that was the purpose of myth. It was like a way for us to make sense of our own lives. And that's just a story about somebody trying. I mean, it's more than that, but it's a story about somebody trying to get home. So that led me down this 10-year-long wormhole of just sort of diving into every facet of Greece. And, we were talking about magic earlier and the gods. There's certain ancient forms of magic where they would use the Odyssey as a divination system, where they would throw dice and then pull out a verse, depending on what the dice said, and then use that as guidance. And so it's just so rich, this sort of history of ancient Greece, and just the tentacles in which it sort of spreads out to. But yeah, it was the Odyssey first, and then that sent me off into all sorts of places.
So what about like Odysseus as a figure? How did you ever sort of map your understanding of yourself and your situation onto him? 'Cause he's quite a complicated protagonist.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what's in the invocation. Tell me a story about the complicated man, or tell me this. I don't know who's that. Might be Fagles, but how does Emily Wilson translate it? Man of many turns.
I can't remember. That might be it.
Yeah, and I think that sort of sums it up because it's ambiguous, but it also suggests this sort of boundary breaking, morally ambiguous character. I mean, I used him kind of like a totem as I was living out this exile, and I kept a journal, and I made all this art which sort of got me through the exile, and the Odyssey got sort of mangled into there. Like I drew a map using like the stops he makes on the Odyssey, and then sort of mirroring where like, okay, where's his Hades, where's my Hades, and plotting out my sort of journey like that. He is a very complicated character. I think he's a bit of an idiot as well. I think Athena is the brains of the operation.
Mm-hmm. That's usually how it works.
Absolutely.
Yeah, have you ever retraced any of that physical journey? Have you ever been to those parts of Greece? And
I've never been to what is called Ithaki, which is, I guess they say is Ithaca. I mean, there's so many places that are contested as being the spots in the Odyssey. I've been to an island called Iraklia, which claims, and I know another island claims this as well, to be the cave of the Cyclops. It was way too hot, so I was too lazy to trek over to it, but I was still sort of on the tail end of my Odyssey, my own personal Odyssey, and I was kind of thinking, well, maybe the Cyclops is facing one's own ego, because the ego can be a very narrow-sighted thing with one eye, so that's how I kind of understood it. Yeah, this sounds like very silly magical thinking, but like, I think people like Carl Jung were also big proponents of using the myths as symbolic totems and mirrors for human psychology and one's own journey.
Definitely.
Yeah, where else have I been? I've been to Delphi in ancient Greece, which was amazing, which was meant to be the navel of the world, where the omphalos sits, the sort of center point that's their axis mundi. But I always find it so funny because it was missing for about 400 or 500 years. How did you guys displace and like lose the center of your world? And then it took some French archaeologists.
That's the metaphor.
Yeah,
that's
right.
Yeah.
And then some French archaeologists dug up an entire like town and moved all these people, and beneath it was Delphi, the center of the universe. So I found that very strange and funny.
So you're talking about the sort of original attraction to that story and to ancient Greece in a kind of mythic sense, and what was it that continued your fascination with that topic and kind of rabbit holing through how that topic has really like infiltrated almost every part of the way that we think about things?
I think it just felt so vivid and tangible and useful, and in a sense, therapeutic what reading the Odyssey did for my own circumstances. That I felt like a bit of a detective and just wanting to know more, and so that led me into like reading Plato and Socrates, none of which I can repeat right now because yes, but I ended up then looking at the tragedies, which are really interesting, especially translations by one of my favorite poets, Anne Carson.
Euripides and
Yeah,
yeah,
her
yeah,
Euripides stuff
yeah,
is amazing,
yeah.
and also she has done her own. Like, she's done loads of stuff because I think she translates as well. But she also did this book about Eros, because there's apart from all the myth, there's all these like philosophical concepts. Like it
Yeah.
is a whole universe,
Yeah.
that culture, like
Yeah.
this ancient culture. And then so yeah, so through her, I became a big fan of Euripides, and I also find tragedy really interesting because they're not moral tales. And what they do, which I find the mechanics of Greek tragedy so interesting, is they throw taboos up in your face that you can't help but observe, which then you end up mirroring with your own experience in a really terrifying way, but you can't quite look away from them. And I think the magic comes from that interaction between you facing the taboo they're bringing up, like patricide, infanticide,
Yeah.
all this stuff. Like, everyone's killing each other, and
Yeah.
it's like these things end with these weird, messy moments of carnage, like
Yeah.
Euripides the Bacchae, and you're like, what the fuck just happened?
Yeah.
But they're not trying to say one thing. And
Have you ever? I mean, some people argue that there's also that they get that from Shakespeare as well, and that there's a kind of world and a universe of original storytelling and original sort of metaphor that comes from that world. But then other people kind of might say that that is derivative of these Greek myths, and other people might say that's derivative of the Bible, and other people might say actually it's Gilgamesh, and that this is the start of the story and start of everything. And do you think there's something attractive about ancient Greece and it being so before our kind of ability to comprehend like time and life in that way? I think we think that we understand what it might have been like to be a sort of a soldier or someone waiting for someone coming home from war, or someone living their day out in those times, but it's kind of beyond our realm of like significance. And do you think that the distance is a helpful tool in sort of using those tales to map onto us, because it sort of allows quite a forgiving period of time and of I don't know, that there's something that intrigues me in that concept, that it's far enough away that we might use it to understand ourselves.
yeah, I think if you look at anything too close, you can't sort of see what it is. So distance is very important in,
Yeah.
in creating a dialogue with these things. What struck my mind what popped into my mind when you were saying that is like, I think, yeah, also the distance of time adds mystery, and mystery is very useful and very fertile
Yeah.
thing. But also, I think it's easy, and you get this in this weird world of culture wars now, where people become very nationalistic about cultures and all this stuff. I don't think we should look, and again, I'm not a scholar. This is just my rogue interpretation. I don't think ancient Greece existed in a bubble, because there was so much trade and cross pollination between all these things. Lots of ideas from the East ended up mixing with it. They were very influenced by Egypt, which predates them. Like, so I think everything is a constant dialogue. Nothing is pure and holy. But I do agree there's something very, very fertile and useful about having the distance, like, to help us make sense of the present.
And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about sort of magic and the occult. How do those concepts play into your understanding of ancient Greece?
So for me, magic and art are the exact same thing. They are, manipulating sound, symbols, images, and stuff to sort of alter reality, let's say, or one's consciousness. And I think most modern occult stuff comes from a mixture of three things, like the a sort of appropriation of the Jewish Kabbalah, which is basically Jewish magic and mysticism, ancient Egyptian stuff, and Greek. And so I guess I'm always trying to go to the source of things, you know, and just keep sort of hunting for knowledge. and stuff. And I'm an occultist, and in terms of the magic, I wanted to and while I was already interested in ancient Greece, I wanted to kind of go back to the source, and I'm just really fascinated. And against that distance and the mystery plays into it. What did the practice of this stuff look like back then? And because there's very little information about what went on in the mystery cults of, let's say, Dionysus or Demeter and all this stuff, because they were mysteries, right? Like people were like initiated and all these shadowy things happened. But there's an amazing book which had a lot to do with me sort of navigating this world, which is called the Greco-Egyptian Magical Papyri in Translation by a guy called Hans Dieter Betz. And there was like all these scrolls found across Egypt, and there are thousands of them, and they're from a time, I guess, of Ptolemaic Egypt, which is when the Greeks colonized Egypt, and then the cultures just got completely sort of mixed up and together. And it's basically a collection, like a collection of thousands of spells. And it's really fascinating seeing these spells trying to like invoke the gods, or like, and they're for like very strange things. Like, okay, as with, I'm sure, today, there's like tons of love spells which are morally questionable. There are spells for like an ulcer, a spell to sleep, a spell for invoking dreams. And yeah, so all of this stuff, I guess being an artist is hard. And for me, all this stuff is a hunt for knowledge to sort of aid in the making of the work, because I'm not really making work about this stuff.
So it's almost like a tool or a talisman, a guide to.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like art is a practice, magic was a practice as well.
Yeah.
So how this sort of culminated with my magical stuff is, at some point I found myself feeling stuck, and I felt kind of like I had no autonomy over my own mind and the process, and nothing was coming out, and I couldn't sort of hack the thing I was writing. And so I was like, okay, well, I have all this stuff I've sort of been digesting and chewing up. So I was like, okay, I'll look at some old alchemical symbols from like Greco-Egyptian times. And I was looking at them and I was like, wait, well, some of these are a bit boring. I was like, maybe I'll just do my own. So I ended up creating my own symbol language that sort of synthesized all this Greek stuff and punk rock and all this other weird shit I'm interested in. And using it in my notebooks and in my magic. And it's something nobody else can read, which made me feel like I had my own autonomy, and it's its own sort of magical shorthand for me to function with. And I've got about 150 symbols, and Athena shows up in there, and then other ideas and notions, and so that's where all this sort of led me to some degree.
Wow. Because I was going to ask if you have a ritualistic relationship with writing, like is it something that you need certain conditions around your sort of physical space when you write, or mental conditions, or is it all in the pre-preparation, as it were?
I think I see creativity kind of like a garden that needs to be watered, and like a lot of this preparation has to lead to make the soil fertile enough for the muses of antiquity, all 9 of them, to hit me on the head with something and let the work happen. Yeah, I do get kind of ritualistic, and it's to sort of get to a state where I'm in touch with the unconscious, which I think is a wordless place, and where art actually comes from. I can talk about them. If I feel like I've given too much away, delete it later. So there's a notion in Socrates and Plato of the daemon, which is where the word demon comes from when Christianity came and shat on all pagan belief systems. And the daemon is so Socrates gets arrested and put on trial for corrupting the youth of Athens with his, ahead of his time ideas. And he said, I didn't do anything, I was true to my daemon. And the daemon is like, I guess in a sort of modern new age way, you could look at it as some holy guardian angel thing. I don't like that approach. It's sort of like maybe an intuition or an inner voice or a guide. So I guess what I'm saying with all this stuff is the imagination is useful. I'm not superstitious at all, because I think if you get into superstition, then it becomes religion, and it also becomes fear-based, and I'm not interested in any of that. I have a very sort of anarchic approach to all this stuff, and it's always going down to what's useful. The imagination.
I think it's a really refreshing perspective. I think a lot of people's relationship with ritual, like you said, is very much about fear and about control, and trying to control something which is ultimately uncontrollable. And that was maybe something
I guess there's a difference between invoking and evoking.
Yeah,
right?
and that was something I think maybe which in ancient Greece or in those texts there is an understanding of that your fate is kind of it's on the one hand it is beyond you and other people are left to decide it, but you can also do things which influence fate.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
which
they still
help.
do magic, right? To
Yeah,
mess with
yeah,
it, and
yeah.
and they try to, in a sense, like what's interesting about some of the spell stuff you find is they're sometimes trying to get these spirits or daemons, or even gods sometimes, to be under the control of the person casting the spell, which is kind of interesting. And then there's other versions like of the sort of magical approach, which then becomes something called theurgy, which I think translates to God working. That, to me, I could be wrong, looks similar to Tantra in India, which is almost like you're embodying the god or the goddess. So, like if you're worshipping Kali or something, essentially you pick up her characteristics and embody them. And there's similar stuff with that in theurgy when they were working with the gods. That's my understanding. Again, um, I feel free for an actual academic to tell me wrong.
I think with these things, you're very much supposed to take what you need from it, and that is the sort of the academic understanding. What about sort of elements of ritual and sacrifice? I couldn't help but feeling in your film that maybe that there is an element of ritual. I don't want to spoil it for anyone that hasn't seen it because it's particularly like surprising and yeah, I just don't want to give the magic of the ending of that film away. But yeah, it feels like you're calling upon something kind of not maybe not of seance, but definitely of ritual towards the end and of preservation and protection and of discourse with something that is not earthly.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. There is a lot of ritual hidden in the film. Let's see if we can talk about it without spoiling. But there
This
is
is a shrine maybe
there's a
that
shrine
appears.
which is to do
Yeah,
with grief
yeah,
and denial of something
yeah.
and trying to work out something. But yeah, grief births that ritual, and then there's other rituals the main character does. I also want to go back to one thing we said earlier, which then could tie into this, is that I think going back to the superstition and all this, and beauty of ritual, one mustn't forget humor, because I think that's the most important thing. And so, and to not take ourselves too seriously with any of this stuff. And that's tied in as well to the sort of kooky rituals you see in the film.
And pilgrimage as well.
Yeah.
That aspect of pilgrimage is really important, and definitely towards the end of that film, it is a kind of summation of a journey. And I guess if you could take one thing away from all your fascinations with that subject, one concept, one idea, one character, one theory, one text, what holds most relevant and most prominent to you of all your learnings?
That is a huge question.
Yeah, sorry, you can take a moment to think about it.
It would be catharsis, but, and there's tons of people who disagree with the meaning of this, tons of current philosophers. I think that word is misused these days. People sort of dish it out like it's paracetamol. It's like, oh, it must be so cathartic to write that stuff. If you go back into the ancient texts and stuff, they're not saying you achieve catharsis, which is this emotional purge, by creating your own work. It's by witnessing other art, which is why tragedy was so important even in those healing sanctuaries, to get the emotional purge to come. So it was a spiritual exercise as well. So that's it, just hoping that you can make a piece of art that exists within the mystery, within sort of mystery, doesn't spoon feed the audience and gives them a chance to have a dialogue and reach a point of catharsis.
And is that something that you hope your films will do to an audience?
I hope so, but if it makes them laugh, that's good enough.
And what about, so wrapping up, is there a physical object that you associate with your subject or that reminds you strongly of everything we've been speaking about?
Yes, I have a very, very dear friend of mine, an artist in her own right. She is constantly looking in junk shops and sides of, and scavenging things from the side of the roads and collecting loads of wonderful junk. and
Magpie.
yeah, it's a magpie. She found a little brass owl in a antique shop and brought it to me because the owl represents
Athena?
Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and I have Athena tattooed to my arm like a total idiot. And so that's very dear to me. And again, I'm not superstitious about it. I just like looking at it and holding it, and I do some rituals with it, and I travel with it because, you know, she in the Odyssey
Yeah.
cleared his path and made sure that bonehead got around
And
properly.
the symbol of a pin and something of to a sort of physical talisman also really important in the Odyssey.
Yeah, it
Particularly
is.
during journeying and traveling.
Absolutely. So yeah, I always carry this thing with me, which is why it's not here because I thought it was at my studio, but it's actually in a suitcase,
As long as it's
ready to go to the
safe,
next place.
That's what
Yeah.
needs to happen. Okay, so finally, I always like to ask whether there is a song that reminds you of your subject or any song lyrics specifically.
So yeah, so I'm gonna pick a Bob Dylan song, and why I think Dylan is probably like oddly like the biggest influence on my writing, in some ways, and there's tons of Homeric stuff peppered and jammed into his massive pantheon. I'm not going to quote this properly, but if you've seen the Scorsese documentary about Dylan, there's this bit that starts up, which at the beginning, which I'm not going to quote it verbatim, but he's essentially saying, "What if you were born in the wrong place, in the wrong town, to the wrong family?" And he goes, "I feel like my whole life's work is just trying to get back to my real home." And he is kind of Odysseus, and he's mentioned this in his Nobel speech. He goes into a lot about the Odyssey, and so I remember listening to this song of his, which is great, which is about a journey. It's called Mississippi, or it's about saying that he stayed in Mississippi too long. And this one verse sort of popped out at me, and I was like, that's Dylan as Odysseus. So the lyric goes, "Well, I got here following the southern star. I crossed that river just to be where you are. Only thing I did wrong was stayed in Mississippi way too long. Well, my ship's been split to splinters and it's sinking fast. I'm drowning in the poison, got no future, got no past. But my heart is not weary, it's light and it's free. I've got nothing but affection for those who sailed with me." And as we know, Odysseus' whole crew dies.
That's him on Calypso's island,
Exactly.
basically indulging in the pleasures
Yeah.
and
So
not
Calypso's
returning
island is Mississippi, I
home.
guess.
Yeah,
So,
get me straight to Mississippi.
so that's the song.
That's a beautiful pick. Karen, thank you so much for such like a thoughtful and enlightening conversation. It's been a real pleasure to chat
Oh,
to you.
thanks, Emmeline. Thanks for having me.
You're so welcome.